A 43-year-old man, physically destroyed, lying in a hospital bed, held his younger brother's hand and whispered the words that would change the course of a dynasty. "Donald, never drink, never touch a drop of alcohol." It was 1981, and Fred Trump Jr., the forgotten heir of the Trump empire, was about to die. Not in a plane crash, not in an epic battle, but slowly, tragically drowned in vodka and regrets. And there, in that hospital room smelling of disinfectant and imminent death, Donald Trump made a promise he would keep for the rest of his life. But this promise wasn't born solely from brotherly love. It was born from guilt, from fear, and from the brutal understanding that he himself had helped destroy his brother. New York, 1950s. In the prosperous Trump family, two boys grew up under the relentless shadow of an iron patriarch named Fred Trump Sr. He was a man who built an empire from scratch, erecting thousands of apartments in Brooklyn and Queens, transforming concrete and brick into mountains of money. Fred Sr. didn't believe in weakness, didn't believe in sentimentality. He believed in results, in profits, in absolute dominance. The eldest son carried his father's name, Fred Trump Jr. 8 years older than Donald, Fred Jr. was the apparent heir, the firstborn, the chosen one, and in many ways he was everything Donald wasn't. Fred Jr. was tall, incredibly handsome, with the radiant smile of a 1950s movie star. He had natural charisma, a magnetic personality that attracted people like magnets. He was kind, empathetic, sensitive. He was, in all traditional senses, perfect. But there was a problem. Fred Jr. had a gentle soul in a family that valued brutality. He had compassion in a world that demanded cruelty. He wanted freedom in an empire built on absolute control. Fred Trump Sr. had clear plans for his firstborn. Fred Jr. would take over the family business. He would learn the brutal art of New York construction, where you negotiate with violent unions, bribe inspectors, crush competitors, and turn every inch of land into gold. That's how the Trumps operated. That's how Fred Sr. had built his kingdom. And that's how the eldest son would continue the legacy. But Fred Jr. had other dreams, dreams that didn't fit in Excel spreadsheets or architectural plans. He looked at the sky and saw freedom. He saw unlimited possibilities. He saw a life away from concrete walls, away from suffocating pressure, away from his father's judgmental gaze. Still, he tried. God knows he tried. Fred Jr. worked in the family company, attended meetings, visited construction sites, pretended interest in profit margins and zoning codes. But it was visible to everyone that his heart wasn't there. He was like a caged bird, beating its wings against invisible bars. And then, Fred Jr. did something his father considered unforgivable. He followed his heart. He became a pilot, not just any pilot. He was accepted by TWA, one of the largest and most prestigious airlines in the world at the time. Fred Jr. wore the impeccable uniform with its golden stripes and shining emblems. He flew to exotic destinations, commanding giant planes through the skies, living the dream he had forged since childhood. For Fred Jr., it was liberation. For Fred Trump Sr., it was betrayal. "You're a bus driver in the sky," the patriarch would say with disdain whenever the subject came up. He couldn't hide his disappointment, his disgust, his feeling that his son was wasting talent that could have built skyscrapers. For Fred Sr., being a pilot wasn't a respectable profession. It was service, not command. It was following predetermined routes, not creating empires. Family gatherings became psychological battlefields. Fred Sr. humiliated his eldest son in front of everyone. He made cutting comments about Fred, the bus driver. He compared his son to his younger siblings, especially to Donald, who demonstrated the killer instinct necessary for business. And Donald, Donald was watching everything, absorbing every interaction, learning a brutal lesson about how the Trump world worked. He saw his older brother, handsome, charismatic, and kind, be systematically destroyed by his own father. And Donald drew a simple and terrible conclusion: to survive in this family, to earn the patriarch's love and respect, you couldn't be kind. You had to be ruthless. So Donald began participating in the humiliations. He made jokes about his brother's profession. He joined his father in ridiculing Fred Jr. for having chosen to fly planes instead of building empires. Each comment was an additional knife in Fred Jr.'s heart, and Donald stuck them in with the cold efficiency of someone who learned that empathy is weakness. Fred Jr. began to crumble. The pressure was unbearable. He loved his family, but his family made him feel like a constant failure. He loved his job, but received no validation from the only man whose approval truly mattered. He was trapped between two worlds: the sky where he felt free and the ground where he felt like a failure. And that's when Fred Jr. found temporary refuge. A liquid, transparent solution that burned the throat but anesthetized the pain. Vodka, whiskey, anything that would silence the voices, that would mute the constant judgment, that would make the disappointment in his father's eyes disappear, even if just for a few hours. Alcoholism didn't arrive all at once. It was gradual, one drink after a long flight, 2 drinks after a particularly brutal family dinner, an entire bottle after yet another argument about wasting his life. Alcohol was the only place where Fred Jr. didn't have to be the rejected heir, the ridiculed pilot, the inadequate son. But alcohol collects its price, and it collects with compound interest. His piloting career began to suffer. Fred Jr. started arriving late. His colleagues noticed the tremor in his hands, the smell he tried to hide with gum and cologne. The airline, which couldn't risk the safety of hundreds of passengers, eventually fired him. The only thing Fred Jr. loved, the only thing that brought him genuine joy, was ripped away from him. His marriage collapsed. His wife could no longer bear the broken promises, the hidden bottles, the constant lies that alcoholism forces you to tell. She took the children and left. Fred Jr., now without a job and without his own family, made the most humiliating walk of his life. He returned to his parents' house. The heir who had sought freedom in the skies was now back in the original prison, working in minor positions at his father's company, accepted as acts of charity, not respect. Have you ever watched someone you love slowly self-destruct? Ever witnessed a brilliant person, full of potential, dissolve before your eyes and felt you could have done something different? Leave it in the comments if you've ever lived through this pain, because what Donald Trump witnessed in his brother's final years would haunt him for the rest of his life. The final years were painful to watch. Fred Jr. was a shadow of the man he had been. His handsome face was swollen and reddened. His athletic body was destroyed by cirrhosis. The hands that once controlled giant planes now trembled so much he could barely hold a glass of water, and yet even at the bottom of the abyss, Fred Jr. maintained one last thread of lucidity. He looked at his younger brother, at Donald, who was ascending in the business world, conquering Manhattan, doing everything Fred Jr. should have done but didn't want to. And Fred Jr. saw something in Donald that terrified him, the same potential path to self-destruction, just through different methods. In private conversations, when he could still form coherent sentences, Fred Jr. would grab Donald's arm with surprising strength for someone so physically devastated. "Donald," he would say with desperate urgency, "never drink, never start. You have a great future. Don't waste it like I wasted mine." Donald listened. But did he really understand? Did he understand that he wasn't just hearing advice from a recovering alcoholic, but the final words of wisdom from a brother who loved him enough to use his last moments trying to protect him? In 1981, Fred Trump Jr. died. He was only 43 years old. Complications related to alcoholism destroyed his internal organs. The body that once flew through the skies was now motionless in a coffin. Donald Trump was devastated in ways he rarely admits publicly. He carried guilt for having participated in the humiliations, guilt for having become the favorite son at his brother's expense, guilt for not having defended Fred Jr. when he needed it most, guilt for having learned the wrong lesson from his brother's tragedy. Not that compassion is valuable, but that weakness is punishable. But from all that pain, from all that guilt, Donald Trump extracted a lesson that became one of the most absolute rules of his life. He transformed his brother's last advice into an armor of self-discipline that would never be removed. From 1981 until today, Donald Trump has never drunk a drop of alcohol, never smoked a cigarette, never used recreational drugs. At state dinners where $1,000 French champagne is served, Trump orders Diet Coke. At celebrations of billion-dollar victories where others toast with the finest wines, Trump raises a glass of orange juice. At parties where multi-million-dollar negotiations are sealed with rare whiskey, Trump maintains mineral water. People make jokes. They don't understand. They find it strange that a billionaire, a president, a man who broke so many other social rules, maintains this specific one with religious rigidity. But Trump knows what they don't know. He knows that every time he refuses a drink, he's honoring Fred Jr.'s memory. He's keeping the promise made at a hospital bedside. He's proving that at least one good thing came from that family tragedy. Years later, when Donald was already an established billionaire, he received from his father the famous $1 million loan to expand his Manhattan businesses. By 1970s standards, it was a significant amount. But in the New York real estate market, it was just the beginning, a seed that needed much more to grow. What Trump did with that money showed he had learned some lessons from his father, but not all. He used the $1 million to secure purchase options on land nobody wanted. He worked at construction sites, learning to negotiate with unions and suppliers. He used that initial capital and the technical knowledge he acquired to convince banks to lend hundreds of millions for audacious projects like the Grand Hyatt Hotel. But unlike his father, who destroyed his eldest son in pursuit of creating the perfect heir, Donald kept at least one sacred promise. He maintained the discipline that Fred Jr. begged him to maintain. Today, when Donald Trump is at public events, when journalists ask why he never drinks, he occasionally mentions Fred Jr. He talks about the older brother, who could have been everything, but who was broken by the toxic combination of family pressure and chemical self-destruction. What he rarely admits is his own guilt. He rarely talks about how he actively participated in his brother's destruction, about how he chose his father's side in psychological battles, about how he learned that being loved in the Trump family meant being brutal, not kind. The story of Fred Trump Jr. isn't just about alcoholism. It's about the cost of not fitting into a family that values only one specific type of success. It's about how expectations can crush souls. It's about how sometimes kindness is punished and cruelty is rewarded. It's about how families can destroy those they love most simply by not accepting who they really are. And it's about how Donald Trump, for all his success, for all his wealth, for all his fame, carries with him a promise made at a deathbed. A promise that serves both as tribute and as a constant reminder that he could have been different. He could have defended his brother. He could have chosen compassion over ambition. But he didn't choose that. And now, all that remains is to keep that promise. Never a drop. Not a single drop. If this story made you think about how families shape destinies, about the price of success, and about the promises we carry, leave that like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more stories that reveal the tragedies behind fortunes. And tell me in the comments, do you think Donald keeps the promise out of love for his brother, or guilt for what he helped do to him? Let's talk. And if you want to know other stories about family sacrifices and the hidden costs of empire, click on the next video that appears on the screen. See you there.